Hi, Mitchell Levy, global credibility expert, and I am and this is really cool. I got to do two today. I'm in my favorite time of the day. And I'm going to say of the week. I have my the second favorite thing I get to do. What is my second favorite thing? Having deep conversations. You guys get to experience that. That's probably my first favorite thing too. But this is my second time. I've got Jennifer McCollum. I am uh, good friend. Really enjoy hanging out with her. Always love having conversations. I'm just going to say up front, we will occasionally reference content from her book. And Jennifer, welcome.
Mitchell, thank you so much. May I call you Mitch?
You could, but I won't listen to you.
Oh,
No,
okay.
I actually, it's so funny. I really do prefer Mitchell. You can call me whatever you want. And as my wife would say, just not late for dinner. Um, but
So funny. All this time,
yeah,
and we've never clarified that.
no, and it's funny. One of the biggest signs of respect that anyone can have for somebody else is to talk about how do you want to have your name pronounced, and whether or not it's live or or we do it ahead of time in the green room. There's a sign of respect that I get for that. So thanks for asking. Uh, my preference is Mitchell and Jennifer. What I'd like to say is, who are you?
I I love. Well, here's one thing I love about you, Mitchell, is how deep you get so quickly, and the "Who are you?" question for me has really evolved over time to this phase of my life and this phase of my career. So my third decade of professional work is almost completing, but also my period of motherhood with two kids in college and one on the way in a couple years is also at a different phase. And so I've been thinking about it just in the 60 seconds that you gave me the fair warning, and a couple things. I think the one thing that would probably describe me more than anything is this love of human connection, and whether it's human connection with kids and family, with the friend group and community group, and also my professional group, my network with people like you, but also the teams that I have created and curated along the way, so and clients. So that human connection is a really big piece of who I am. The other thing is this love of dreaming and aspiring, creating big vision, big dreams, and then rallying a team to go after that. And that's really what I've experienced the last 5 years as the CEO of Linkage, as we sold the company to SHRM, was really the culmination of thinking really big, transforming and executing it to a finish line. And I have found that in my career and in my life, I tend to do that again and again. And then the last piece, if I can have a third, is there's a really big piece about who I am around kind of honor and credibility and responsibility as a firstborn um, daughter. That has always been really important to me, is fulfilling my commitments and my obligations, whether it's to my friends like you, my teams, my organizations, my boards.
By the way, I couldn't have thought of a better answer. I mean, it's who are you? It's not your job title, right? Which is what we often make as a mistake. Who am I? I'm that person who does the following. So, how have you applied? You like doing stuff in teams. Tell me about how you did as a parent in terms of doing that.
Yeah, so and actually I write about this in the book because the especially I think as women and mothers, we tend to hold a lot around, can we be a professional and a mother and a friend and a daughter, and we wrestle with those things maybe a little bit more seriously than certainly my husband or many of the men in my life do. But in terms of family, I tell a really funny story in the book around gathering a very serious conversation with gathering for a very serious conversation with my husband, even before we got married and before children were even in the picture, and really saying, look, this is how I want to parent. I want to parent as a team. I want it to feel 50-50. I frankly want flexibility where you might stay home with the kids one day a week and I'll stay home one day a week. And then we'll have 3 days of a nanny so we can all meet our professional and personal and family aspirations. And I went through this whole thing, kind of setting the vision and setting the intention. And my very sweet husband, who is an equal partner, certainly in life and parenting, kind of just nodded along the way without really understanding what he was committing to until we had the first child. And I'll never forget, it was kind of 22 years ago, and it was the era where men certainly didn't take paternity leave, and if they did, it was a day or two. And he kind of just, I had the baby on a Friday, and he went back to work on a Monday, and my life had completely changed, and his perceptually hadn't changed at all. And it created a series of interesting and funny conversations around what does parenting look like individually and collectively? What does family look like? What does the extended family look like? And so back to your original question, I think when that human connection and that aspiration get targeted toward family, it's, again, how do you unlike when I'm a boss or a CEO or a manager of a team and I have a lot more influence and control, it's very difficult to manage that in a family environment. So I would say delicately and sensitively is how I did it with the family.
It's so funny because we do think when we're in the, ooh, this is very fascinating. I'm going to love to hear your response to this. Sorry, I've thought of the question, then the next question, and now I'm waiting for the response. So here's the interesting part. We think of the world today, many of us do, not me, not you, but in a command and control state. Lots of leadership is command and control. And so you think as the boss, as the CEO, you say something and your team's got to say, you say jump, they say how high. But as a parent, that doesn't happen. Maybe there's a small period of time where your kids do that, but that doesn't happen. So how did you take what you learned from parenting and bring it back into the workforce as a leader?
So here's what's really, I will answer that question, but I also want to answer it in the context of what we're learning at Linkage using our leadership data. And interestingly, that they start to merge really nicely. So when I started, and I always like to use stories as examples. When I started at Linkage, my COO, Rick Pumphrey, who's an amazing, he's been at Linkage for 25 years now. He was a little taken aback with how open and transparent and vulnerable I was with not only the executive team, but the entire staff. And he would say things like, well, historically at Linkage, we haven't shared the financials with the staff. Or historically at Linkage, we wouldn't necessarily offer everybody the chance to input into the strategy. And back to the home question, I had, I don't distinguish who I am in the different contexts. Obviously, you have to tailor a little bit, but I was very open and transparent and vulnerable with my family and raising my children and acknowledging where I felt I had fallen down as a parent or a spouse, and where I had hoped others might meet me halfway. So I took all of that into all of my work experiences. But as I got higher and higher in the corporate ranks, I found that fewer and fewer people operated that way. And so I actually love when I look at the feedback from the staff. I often, the executive team, which is very different from 5 years ago, the executive team is described as open and transparent and feeling like the staff can come and talk about anything, which I think is really helpful.
I'm going to say we absolutely need more leaders like you. And so, okay, we'll do a shameless plug for the book. This is coming out. It's doing really well. Tell me about if I'm a leader and I'm interested in having that feedback. I want to tell the board that, hey, our ROI, our numbers, we're doing great. And the management team, our employees love them. How do we, I know you describe it here a little bit, but how do you do that?
So sorry, how do you describe to the board or the team how wonderful we are?
How how would, oh, sorry. Sometimes I ask 2 or 3 questions in the same area, and it's been one of those days. So if the end result is you were able to explain to the board the numbers, they've seen that.
Mhm.
And and also when you talk to them, you say, by the way, our employee engagement is pretty high because our employees really love us. What are some techniques that you've learned that really brings that out in terms of working at a company, being excited about being there?
I gotcha. Well, a couple things, and I actually failed to make the connection back to our data, which I'll start with now because I think it's important, and that is in this you brought up, which I think is profound. Everything leading up to, and maybe we'll say the kind of 2020. We'll just use pre-COVID, post-COVID because everyone remembers that demarcation. You would very rarely hear when you think about what the characteristics of an exceptional leader are, you would hear more about kind of the brave and the courageous and the competitive and the stereotypes, honestly, that most of us put in our mind of like a very strong, strapping white male leader, because that's how all of us, regardless of our race, background, age, ethnicity, our deep biases would naturally describe a leader. What happened coming out of 2020 as we looked at which leaders were really excelling in this very vague, ambiguous, no one had the answers, we had to move on our feet very quickly, it was very scary. The leaders that did well started to be described with the characteristics that then surfaced in our data as what we call inclusive leadership characteristics. And then I'm going to get back to your question about how do you actually create that. So we started to see the inclusive characteristics like the vulnerability, inclusion, transparency, authenticity, those types of words and characteristics surface. And when we looked and measured leaders, those were the leaders that spiked as the most exceptional, what we call purposeful and inclusive leaders. So then the question becomes, great, well, how do you actually do that? And so when I'm able to tell the board, look, our culture scores are actually quite high, it's because we're creating an environment where people feel like not only their uniqueness is valued, but they feel like they belong. And so examples of that would be in our, you know this reference well, but in our weekly business plan review meeting, where all of the metrics of the organization are held open for the entire staff to see, and we record it, and we invite everybody. We create this enormous transparency of what's happening in the business, what's going well, what's not going well. And when it's not going well, we rally the right people. It could be at many, many levels and many different roles, but everyone feels like they have an opportunity to either leverage a strength or to fix a challenge. And they know there's no surprises. And so that's one example. Another example is how do we create the space where they feel like they're heard? And so psychological safety is a word that's kind of thrown around a lot. But what that actually means is, are we soliciting input, thoughts, ideas, perspectives from deep in the organization and across the organization, and rallying the right teams at the right times? And so that requires us as managers to have a very deep understanding. And I love what you said at the beginning, not of their role, job title, age, experience, but we call them superpowers. What are their unique gifts and strengths? And if we can pull, and I tell a story in the book about Melissa, she's a mid-level product manager, but she's exceptional when it comes to bringing teams together and initiating conversation. And so we pulled Melissa into a role at our first staff offsite in 3 years. When we got back together in 2022, we had her create all of the icebreakers and exercises that would create connection amongst the staff because we knew that was a superpower of hers. So those are a couple examples. I don't know if that's getting at what you'd hoped.
No, it's great. It's so interesting to me. As you were thinking and you mentioned offsite, I remember the conversation I had earlier where I was talking to somebody who they are part of a virtual company. Mm. And so by definition, everything is offsite because they're 100% virtual. and so when they actually had meetings that you would call an offsite, they call it an onsite because it's wherever their virtual onsite is that they're doing. I'm like, man, I love that term. And so it got me thinking about leadership in a way where we don't always show up into an office. And what does that mean to you as as someone who's a leader? I don't know what percentage of the organization is on site versus not. Why don't you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's been a much bigger issue in the last couple of years with this concept of return to work and what's mandated and what's not, and where the employees rebelling and where they're not. And honestly, it's, I mean, just to be super transparent, we went through an acquisition in the midst of um, having our company transition to fully virtual 100% of the time in the middle of COVID. So we were hybrid. Then we realized how well we could actually maintain our culture during COVID. So we sublet our office. Then we were acquired by a company, SHRM, a fantastic company, but they're 10x the size in terms of employees. And 70% of the people are on site in an office at our headquarters 3 days a week. And so it created this little bit of division because Linkage was 100% virtual. And I say quotes because I happen to live in the area where I could drive into this office 3 days a week, but I was the minority. And it created this kind of virtual office cultural divide. And we've had to work really hard collectively because the virtual team, which was not a problem when we were 100% virtual, is questioning, like, what is my path to promotion? How can I feel like a part of the SHRM culture when I'm remote? Even though 30%
Mhm.
of the people are remote, a big chunk of those people are Linkage people. So it's something we haven't quite figured out. But here's what I would say: even when we had the offsite, as I had described it, it was really an onsite because we hadn't been together in 3 years, right? Since 2020, so maybe a little over 2 years. And when we came on site together, we curated this really intentional experience where we did things that are much harder, not impossible, but much harder in a virtual environment. Collective visioning, deep one-on-one team and organizational conversations, social networking over food and drink and bowling and foosball, things that are not impossible but harder in a virtual environment. And those tend to be the things that are so important. It's not that 100% virtual can't work. It's when you come together, whether you're virtual, hybrid, or in person full time, are you creating the right experiences for the outcomes you're trying to drive? Is it innovation? Is it collaboration? Is it curiosity? Is it new networks? Like, you've got to curate that experience. And I think that's where most companies are falling down a little bit because they're not being intentional about when and how they come together.
Is it is it that they're not thinking about their people as people?
I mean, I don't want to cast any aspersions, so I'm not sure they're thinking that deeply at all. There's a perspective, especially with CEOs, by the way, there's a perspective that productivity is higher when people are physically together. Now, for me, because most of my staff and most of my network that I deal with every day, kind of like with you, are not co-located with me. I come into my office, I shut the door, and I'm here for 9 or 10 hours. I don't feel like there's any benefit of coming to the office on days like that. When we say,
Yeah.
look, every other week as an executive team, we're going to come together in person and we're going to save very specific conversations that are more sensitive or that are more complex, and we want to be able to really engage each other fully. That's intentional, right? So it's not like, am I thinking of the staff as people or not people? Am I thinking of the experiences I need to create to get the outcomes from that staff? Is, I think, the bigger question. And I just heard of a company, by the way, that is 100% virtual, but it's mandated that you rotate 1 week a month through an office. And I'm thinking, like, does it matter which office? Does it matter which people are in the office at the same time? And if the answer is no, then why bother? It seems like a strange use of money.
I'm going to think about that afterwards. That is a very strange, because I'd be curious what the rationale is for that. But more importantly, it comes back to the question of, if you think about people inside your organization as people, if you think about, like, as a parent, right? You think of as your kids, as they mature, right? The college age and then go into the workforce, there's less and less quote unquote control that you have and more of just influence and doing the right thing.
That's right. And I think if I were to guess as to why CEOs believe that productivity is higher, and look, you can look at a lot of data and you can find the data to support your argument, right? There's a lot of data that says for women and underrepresented populations, it's actually better to be virtual because it levels the playing field more than being in office. So regardless of the data that you pull, I think my guess would be that most CEOs are of the generation and the demographics that grew up in an in-office environment and it's comfortable for them. So if I can see my people, if I can monitor them, back to kind of the old school command and control. But the truth is I could come into this office for 8 or 10 hours a day and close the door and do my online shopping. Like, I'm not sure that they would know, right? So at some point you've got to trust that your team members and your managers, they know based on the output and the performance what what how effective our people are. And if they're not effective, it shouldn't matter if they're in a virtual hybrid or an in-person environment. You've got to deal with that as a manager.
So I assume you've given a bunch of speeches already on the book and sit on the platform. What's your favorite chapter?
Oh, my favorite chapter is the clarity chapter. And I think because it goes back to your first question of so clarity, just so you know, is when I ask you or anyone, like, what is your aspiration? It could be 5 or 10 years out, but more likely it's kind of 2, 3 years out. It's far enough so it doesn't feel like too close to current reality, but it represents vision and dreaming and aspiration. And I find, and we find in our data that women do struggle with this more because they tend to define their success in terms of others, whether it's family or team or staff, and have trouble putting themselves in the picture. But what I love, and this is work I've done for more than 20 years, is helping people get clarity on what success looks like for them. It could be anywhere in their life. We tend to focus professionally. And so the book talks about how I gained clarity to take this CEO role 5.5 years ago at Linkage. What's the process that I went through? What are the conditions where clarity can emerge? Doing it in the context of community help, and you have actually helped me personally with this too, gain clarity through talking it through with others. But if you're clear about what you want, it helps with a lot of the other, what we call the hurdles to advancement in the book. It gets clearer on what you ask for, who you draw into your network, what you say yes and no to, how you build your brand. So a lot of things really surround, getting clear first before trying to tackle some other things.
I think that could have been a loaded question, which I didn't know the answer, but I thought that was the case because I've made the switch about 5 months ago of focusing purely on credibility and focusing more on clarity. And what I found is that 98% of those executives I speak to don't have clarity. I mean, this is a big issue, and I think it's really simple, but we don't focus on it. And so I'm just going to ask a question I don't know the answer to from your perspective. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that people don't have that clear clarity? I mean, you said it perfectly. What you said was, well, what is success for you in a way that it helps you and the company? Like, okay, that seems really simple to me. That's kind of what I do. But why do you think most people don't do that?
A couple of reasons. And again, in the book is geared toward any woman who aspires to advance in her career and any man or executive or ally who aspires to help her. That said, there are a lot of leadership lessons when I talk to men of all backgrounds, races, and ethnicities. They say, gosh, this resonates with me too. So I don't want to make this a gender thing. However, we do this for a living. We develop and assess, women and men leaders, but related to this content, it's mostly the women leaders. And by and large, they'll say one of three things. One is, I don't actually know why no one has ever asked me, or I have never thought about it. The second, which is more likely, is I don't have time for it. I'm so focused on my day-to-day and so many my first and second and third jobs, whether it's in the office, at home, or the staff care. women have struggle making time or finding time to do that for themselves. And the third, which is the most heartbreaking, is, isn't it worse to claim what you want and to acknowledge that verbally and then not get it? That would be worse than actually putting it out there at all. And my response is always, no, it actually isn't worse. And the reason is because this act of claiming and describing and painting a picture for what success looks like for you, I call it, the universe conspiring to help you, whether it's me or you or your network and community or your family. Once it's out there, things will start to happen and manifest in ways that you would never know. You would certainly never be able to manage yourself, but you have to put it out there so that the universe can conspire to help you get it. And it breaks my heart when I ask women and men, what do you want? And they come to me for help, but they can't describe what they want. And it's very difficult to help someone who doesn't have any clarity at all.
That was absolutely beautifully said. Thank you. And I'm going to say, for those who, I've got two more questions. And one is, for those who find this fascinating or interested in Jennifer's book, you could just Google this, go to Amazon. I put the link in the chat. I put the link to the audiobook because my preference is audio, even though I've got a beautifully signed copy from Jennifer. Jennifer, how else can people reach out to you?
So anyone can find me on LinkedIn, Jennifer Shear McCollum. You also can go to SHRM.org. We can put it in the chat, SHRM.org/in-her-own-voice. And there's a whole lot of information, not only about me and my blog and my newsletter, but also about the book and the history of the book and some of the ways that you can get access to not only that, but other things we offer to support the advancement of leaders, but the advancement of women leaders specifically. So I'm really good on LinkedIn, and I would love anyone to connect with me and start a conversation.
Nice. Perfect. Thank you for that. And the question I'd love to save for the end is based on this conversation. And now, by the way, you asked me about this. So based on what we did, what question should I ask you, or what question should I ask you now that you can then answer?
So this is going to be a strange one for me because I'm a very glass half full person, and I'm an optimist by nature. But I think there's a lot of learning that can happen when we explore our perceived failures or learnings or mistakes, or what would you do over again if? And I've been reflecting on that a lot because my CEO of Linkage role with the acquisition is coming to an end. We are integrating the company at the year end, so I'll be moving into another role inside of SHRM or outside. But I've been doing a lot of reflecting on, if I were the CEO or a business leader of a bigger unit, what would I do differently? Do you want me to tell you, or you want to ask me?
I think that's a great question. Keep going.
Okay. And I wrote about a few of these examples in the book, but I realized that, with all of us, our oftentimes our biggest strengths are often have a shadow side, and they're some of our biggest opportunities for improvement as well. So when I talk about the love of aspiration, of vision, of dreaming big, and then creating a team to execute against it, there have been many times in my life that I have been told, you are one step ahead and I can't keep up. Like, you're either thinking too fast or you're making decisions too quickly. And I think what I realized at Linkage when I started is I had sold the board, the private equity board, a vision of where I thought Linkage could go to create more value, to create more scale, to create more impact, to create more profit. And I had kind of pre-sold it to the point where they said, great, we're going to hire you, go do that. And when I hit the ground running, I inherited an executive team whom I had not chosen. The CEO was asked to leave, and then I stepped in, and I marched down the vision very quickly, and forgot to really slow down and engage the team so they could put their mark on it. Partly I was concerned about resistance. We were moving away from something very different from what we are now. But I don't think I gave it enough time. And I think my lesson for the next time around is with my superpowers, I also have to measure it with slowing down, being more patient, being a little bit more compassionate and understanding that everybody doesn't process like I do. So I need to meet them where they are as opposed to expecting them to meet me where I am.
I'm going to share some advice that I've actually did twice as a mistake here today, which, by the way, being vulnerable, being coachable is valuable. Dean Miles gave me this advice way back when. He goes, Mitchell, you have too many IPMs. And I'm like, okay, I know a lot of 3-letter acronyms. I'm from Silicon Valley. What does that mean? He goes, you have too many ideas per minute. and 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 what he said was, and Jennifer, this is you fit in this camp. We play well together. Is that you're thinking about an idea and you go through 3, 4, 5 iterations and you get to, you go from 1 to 5 and you start jumping from 1 and then you go to 5 and you forget. And I'm talking about myself. I forget that, oh, wait, I got to do steps. Right. So I love that. That's great. That is great feedback. I appreciate
and I would
that.
say the ideas per minute, again, it's your superpower, right? So there's that beauty side of it. And then there's the other side of me trying to track where your brain is going because you are fast. And so that's, I love Dean Miles too. I know him well. And I would love feedback maybe now or later about what I could do differently to improve as well.
Oh, love that. Well, we'll take that offline because we're at the end of this. I just want to say thank you so much. I love all of our interactions. What's nice about your book is lots of people can experience you just by picking it up and going through it. And of course, you were open to being connected to. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, absolutely. And that book is not only a labor of love, there's a lot of vulnerability about not only me, but a lot of C-level executives of what their lessons were as they rose on their path to leadership. So I appreciate it so much, Mitchell. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are welcome. And that's the cool part when you hear somebody and you feel on their 10 values of credibility, you can hear them echoed through the entire conversation. So this is now your time to take notion. This is your time to spread some cred dust. So if you're still here, click on the like button, share with your friends, write down the aha moments that are relevant for you. And I'll share one thing that I'll put in the notes afterwards. Once a month, we actually do a session that is focused on clarity. And my promise, if you go to this 90-minute session, we have one this week, but depending on when you watch it, it may be a month down the road. My promise to you is that in 90 minutes, you will be able to articulate who you are and how you show up in the world in 10 words or less. So it's Credibility Boosters. Would love to have you there. By the way, I'm so happy that your favorite chapter is the place I play nowadays is on clarity. So very cool. And thanks again for joining us. Everyone else, thanks for joining us. We'll see you at the next episode. Take care. Bye now.